Sariputta and Mahamoggallana, the Buddha's two chief disciples. Night does not fall all at once. It gathers slowly, almost kindly, as if the world itself were exhaling. Sounds soften, shapes blur. What seemed solid in daylight loosens its grip, and in that quiet, something honest begins to speak. Human life often feels like this twilight. We move through days crowded with noise, ambition, and expectation, yet beneath it all there is a low, persistent ache, not always dramatic, not always visible, but present, a sense that something essential is being missed, even while everything appears full. We chase certainty, but nothing stays. We build identities, but they tremble at the smallest change. We cling to people, roles, beliefs, and achievements, hoping they will anchor us only to discover they too are drifting. The Buddha did not turn away from this unease. He turned toward it, and so did those who walked closest beside him. Among the many who gathered around the awakened one, two figures stand like twin peaks rising from the same range, distinct in shape, equal in height, both catching the light of wisdom in different ways. Sariputta and Mahamoggallana, two friends, two seekers, two lives shaped not by blind faith, but by careful seeing. Their story is not a legend meant to distance us. It is a mirror. It speaks to the part of us that longs for clarity, and the part that fears what clarity might dissolve. It reminds us that awakening is not reserved for the extraordinary, but for the sincere, for those willing to look closely and walk steadily, even when the ground feels uncertain beneath their feet. Tonight, let us sit near their footsteps, not as historians counting dates, but as fellow travelers listening for something true. Before robes, before teachings, before the quiet authority of awakened disciples, there were simply two young men walking the dust-covered roads of ancient India. They were not born into enlightenment. They were born into question. Sariputta was known for his sharp intellect, his ability to analyze, to reason, to cut through confusion with clarity. His mind was like a well-honed blade, precise, disciplined, relentless in its pursuit of truth. Mahamoggallana, by contrast, carried a different sensitivity. His insight was intuitive, inward, almost mystical. Where Sariputta examined, Moggallana perceived. Where one asked carefully structured questions, the other listened for subtle currents beneath the surface. Yet they were bound by friendship, not the shallow bond of convenience, but the rare companionship formed when two people are equally dissatisfied with shallow answers. Together they studied under teachers, practiced austerities, explored philosophies promising liberation. Together they found those paths incomplete. This shared disappointment is important. It is easy to romanticize spiritual seeking, but often it begins with disillusionment. The slow realization that inherited beliefs no longer hold, that rituals performed without understanding cannot quiet the heart, that clever arguments alone cannot untangle suffering. Many watching now may recognize this stage, a sense of having tried everything that was offered, only to remain restless, not because life is unbearable, but because it feels vaguely unreal, like living in a beautifully furnished house where something essential is missing. Sariputta and Mahamoggallana did not reject the world in bitterness. They rejected confusion, and that rejection sharpened their attention. One day, Sariputta encountered a monk walking quietly for alms. There was nothing outwardly remarkable about him. No dramatic display, no attempt to persuade. Yet something in his presence was different, steady, unhurried, unburdened. His steps seemed to arise from stillness rather than intention. Sariputta, trained in debate and doctrine, did not ask for a grand teaching. He asked simply, "Who is your teacher, and what does he teach?" The response was modest, almost understated. A few lines pointing not to belief, but to causality, to the way suffering arises and the way it ceases. No poetry, no flourish, just clarity. And in that moment, something in Sariputta's mind fell silent. This is often misunderstood. Awakening is not always an explosion. Sometimes it is the sudden absence of noise. A long-held tension releases. A question dissolves rather than being answered. Sariputta saw, directly and unmistakably, that whatever arises does so dependent on conditions, and whatever depends on conditions can cease. This was not a theory to admire. It was a truth to stand within. A truth that left no room for a permanent self to hide. He did not keep this discovery to himself. Friendship, when rooted in sincerity, does not hoard insight. Sariputta sought out Mahamoggallana and shared what he had seen, not as a conversion, but as an offering. He spoke plainly, without embellishment, trusting his friend's own wisdom to recognize the truth. Mahamoggallana listened, and like a stone dropped into deep water, the insight traveled swiftly, unobstructed to the depths. He too saw, not gradually, not intellectually, but direct. This is the power of spiritual friendship. Not agreement, but resonance. Not persuasion, but recognition. Together, they sought the Buddha. Meeting the awakened one did not overwhelm them. It clarified them. The Buddha did not demand allegiance. He offered a path and invited them to walk. And they did, not as followers surrendering their discernment, but as practitioners refining it. From that point on, Sariputta and Mahamoggallana became pillars of the Sangha, each embodying a different expression of wisdom. Sariputta became known for his profound understanding of the teachings. He could articulate complex truths with simplicity, guiding others through confusion without condescension. His wisdom was steady, grounded, compassionate. He did not shine to impress, but to illuminate. Mahamoggallana, on the other hand, was renowned for his mastery of meditative absorption and inner perception. He explored the mind's depths with fearless attention, encountering realms of experience that defy ordinary language. Yet he never mistook these experiences for liberation itself. His power was always anchored in humility. Together, they demonstrated something subtle but essential. The path is not one size fits all. Some awaken through careful analysis, others through deep stillness, some through questioning, others through surrender. The Dharma is wide enough to hold them all. In a world that pressures us to conform, to adopt a single identity, a single narrative, a single way of being, this is quietly revolutionary. It reminds us that liberation does not require imitation. It requires sincerity. Sariputta did not try to become Mahamoggallana. Mahamoggallana did not compete with Sariputta. They walked side by side, honoring difference without division. Their friendship was not threatened by contrast. It was enriched by it. And perhaps this is one of their greatest teachings for us today. We live in an age of comparison, metrics, rankings, spiritual hierarchies disguised as humility. Even inner practice can become a performance, measured against others, broadcast for validation. In such an environment, it is easy to forget that the path unfolds uniquely in each heart. Sariputta and Mahamoggallana remind us that wisdom does not need an audience, and depth does not need applause. That two people can serve the same truth in entirely different ways, and neither diminishes the other. They also remind us that awakening does not erase humanity. Sariputta was gentle, patient, deeply caring. Mahamoggallana, despite his extraordinary inner abilities, remained grounded in discipline and ethical conduct. Neither claimed superiority, neither sought recognition. They did not escape the world by rejecting it. They transcended it by understanding it. As we pause here, consider your own way of seeing, your own temperament, your own questions. You do not need to force yourself into another shape. You need only to see clearly where you are, with what you have. This is where the path began. As the seasons turned and the Sangha grew, Sariputta and Mahamoggallana did not remain as distant exemplars, perched above ordinary life. They moved among people. They listened. And in doing so, they revealed something essential about the nature of awakening. It deepens relationship rather than dissolving it. There is a quiet misconception that enlightenment creates distance, that insight lifts one away from the messiness of human life. But those who truly see do not float above the world. They stand firmly within it, without being owned by it. Sariputta and Mahamoggallana embodied this balance in different ways. Sariputta's presence was often described as calming, almost sheltering. When people approached him, burdened with confusion, he did not overwhelm them with lofty ideas. He met them where they stood. His mind, sharp as it was, moved slowly when guiding others. He understood that clarity cannot be forced. Like muddy water settling when left undisturbed, understanding emerges when conditions are gentle. He had an unusual patience for questions, especially the ones asked clumsily, repetitively, or from fear. Where others might grow frustrated, Sariputta listened carefully, hearing not just the words, but the suffering beneath them. His teaching was not an assertion of authority. It was an act of care. Mahamoggallana, meanwhile, worked often at the edges of experience. His mastery of meditation allowed him to perceive states of mind and realms of existence unseen by most. Stories tell of him encountering beings trapped in suffering far beyond the ordinary human condition, and responding not with detachment, but with compassion grounded in wisdom. Yet here is what matters most. He never confused extraordinary perception with liberation itself. In a world fascinated by spiritual spectacle, this restraint is profound. Mahamoggallana knew that insight without freedom is still a form of bondage, and that even the most refined experiences are impermanent. Together, these two disciples held the Sangha in balance. Sariputta ensured that the teachings remained clear, coherent, and accessible. Mahamoggallana ensured that practice remained deep, experiential, and transformative. One guarded understanding, the other guarded realization. This harmony speaks directly to a tension many face today. Some are drawn to knowledge, books, talks, ideas, endless analysis. Others chase experiences, visions, altered states, emotional peaks. Sariputta and Mahamoggallana remind us that wisdom matures when understanding and direct experience support each other rather than compete. There were moments when this balance was tested. Disagreements arose within the community, as they always do when human beings gather with strong intentions. Questions of conduct, interpretation, and discipline surfaced. In such times, Sariputta often acted as a stabilizing force. He clarified without condemning, corrected without humiliating. He understood that right view loses its power when wielded as a weapon. Mahamoggallana, when encountering conflict, tended to look beneath the surface. He sensed the emotional currents, the fear, pride, or insecurity driving behavior. His guidance often addressed these roots directly, not through argument, but through presence and example. Their approaches differed, but their aim was the same: the alleviation of suffering. It is tempting to imagine that great disciples lived free from hardship, untouched by loss or danger. This is not so. Mahamoggallana, despite his abilities, faced hostility and violence. His life ended not in comfort, but through brutal attack. Even profound realization does not grant immunity from the world's cruelty. What it grants is freedom from hatred and response. When Mahamoggallana encountered those who wished him harm, he did not meet them with anger. He understood that violence arises from confusion, from minds trapped in delusion and pain. This understanding did not make the suffering disappear, but it prevented it from multiplying. Sariputta, too, faced illness near the end of his life. His body weakened, his breath grew shallow, yet those around him observed not fear, but clarity, not clinging, but gratitude. Even as strength faded, his concern remained with others, guiding, reassuring, offering what little energy remained for the benefit of those still struggling. These moments matter because they show us the fruit of practice where it counts most. Not in ideal conditions, but in vulnerability. Not when life aligns with our wishes, but when it does not. In modern life, many seek spiritual practice as a form of self-improvement, another way to optimize control or protect oneself. Sariputta and Mahamoggallana quietly challenged this motive. The path they walked was not about becoming invulnerable. It was about becoming free. Free from the compulsion to defend an identity. Free from the reflex to push away discomfort. Free from the need to be right, admired, or secure. Their freedom expressed itself not as withdrawal, but as availability. They were available to listen, to guide, to respond wisely in the midst of uncertainty. Another subtle teaching lies in how they related to the Buddha himself. Despite their closeness, neither clung to him as an external authority to lean on forever. Respect was deep, but dependency was absent. The Buddha encouraged discernment, and his chief disciples exemplified it. They did not echo his words blindly. They embodied his understanding independently. This matters in a time when many seek teachers, influencers, or traditions to provide certainty. Sariputta and Mahamoggallana show that true guidance does not replace your seeing. It strengthens it. A teacher is not a shelter from responsibility, but a mirror reflecting your own capacity for wisdom. Their relationship with each other also evolved over time. Friendship deepened into something quieter, less defined by words. Mutual respect replaced the need for affirmation. Each knew the other's strength without comparison. Imagine such a friendship, one that does not require agreement to remain intact or competition to feel alive. A friendship rooted in shared commitment to truth, even when that truth dismantles familiar ground. This too is part of the path. As the Sangha matured, Sariputta and Mahamoggallana became living reminders that awakening is not a singular event frozen in time. It unfolds moment by moment in how one speaks, listens, responds, and lets go. They did not rush the path. They did not grasp at results. They walked with steadiness, trusting that clarity deepens when met with patience. For those listening now, perhaps burdened by the feeling of being late, behind, or insufficient, their lives offer reassurance. The path does not demand perfection. It asks for honesty. It does not require brilliance. It asks for sincerity. Whether your strength lies in careful understanding or quiet stillness, in questioning or in listening, there is room for you here. Sariputta and Mahamoggallana did not walk ahead to leave us behind. They walked ahead to show that the way is possible. As years passed, the presence of Sariputta and Mahamoggallana became woven into the living fabric of the community, not as symbols carved in stone, but as steady rhythms, like breath, like footsteps returning again and again to the same ground, never worn thin by repetition. What becomes most striking when we sit quietly with their lives is not what they achieved, but what they relinquished. Sariputta relinquished the pride of intellect. His brilliance never hardened into superiority. Though praised for wisdom, he remained teachable until the end. When corrected, he listened. When uncertain, he paused. In a world that rewards confidence over clarity, this humility is rare. It reveals a mind that no longer needs to protect itself. Mahamoggallana relinquished fascination with power. Though capable of profound inner feats, he did not seek recognition for them. He understood that clinging to extraordinary states is still clinging, and that attachment to subtle pleasure can bind as tightly as attachment to gross desire. His freedom lay not in what he could access, but in what he could release. Together, they illuminate a central truth of the path. Awakening is subtraction, not accumulation. It is the gradual unburdening of the mind, the laying down of what was never necessary to carry. This truth runs counter to much of modern life. We are taught to add skills, experiences, identities, followers, possessions. Even spirituality can become another collection, another way to decorate the self. Sariputta and Mahamoggallana stand quietly against this current, showing that peace emerges not when life is complete, but when it is no longer crowded. Their teachings, spoken and unspoken, were never about becoming someone new. They were about seeing through the illusion of someone who needs to become anything at all. Consider how Sariputta guided those entangled in views, rigid opinions about self, world, and destiny. He did not attack beliefs head-on. He invited careful observation. He showed how views arise dependent on conditions, how they shift, how clinging to them creates friction. He trusted that when seen clearly, false certainty loosens on its own. Mahamoggallana, working more directly with the raw material of mind, helped practitioners encounter fear, desire, and restlessness without turning away. He demonstrated that even the darkest mental states can be known without being feared, that awareness does not collapse when it meets intensity. It widens. In this, their teachings converge. Both point toward intimacy with experience, without ownership, toward a way of being present that neither indulges nor suppresses, toward a freedom that does not require the world to be different in order to be at ease. Their final days offer perhaps the clearest window into this freedom. Sariputta, sensing the approach of death, returned to the place of his birth to be near his mother. She had long been skeptical of his path, unconvinced by his renunciation. Yet in his final moments, through gentle conversation and quiet presence, her resistance softened, not through argument, but through the unmistakable peace he embodied. Sometimes the most persuasive teaching is the absence of fear. As his body weakened, Sariputta's mind remained lucid, untroubled. There was no grasping at life, no dread of its ending, only gratitude for the path and concern that others might understand it clearly. Mahamoggallana's death, violent and abrupt, revealed a different aspect of the same freedom. Though capable of escaping harm, he accepted the ripening of past conditions without resentment. There was no story of injustice clung to, no anger carried forward. Pain occurred, but suffering did not take root. This distinction is subtle, but essential. Pain is part of life. Suffering is what we add when we resist what cannot be controlled. In a time when many seek spiritual practice to avoid pain, these lives gently correct us. The path does not promise protection from loss, illness, or death. It offers freedom within them. What does this mean for us here and now? It means that awakening is not somewhere else. It is not reserved for ancient forests or exceptional beings. It unfolds in ordinary moments, when we notice the tightening of desire and choose not to follow it, when we feel the sting of criticism and do not build a self around it, when we sit with uncertainty without demanding immediate resolution. Sariputta and Mahamoggallana did not live extraordinary lives because of special circumstances. They lived ordinary lives with extraordinary attention. They listened deeply, they spoke carefully, they acted without haste. And in doing so, they revealed that the path is not a dramatic escape from life, but a profound return to it. Their friendship, too, offers a final teaching. In a culture that often frames growth as a solitary pursuit, they remind us that companionship matters, that walking together, without comparison or dependency, can steady the path, that seeing another embody clarity can awaken it in us. You may not have a Sariputta or a Mahamoggallana beside you, but you have the capacity to be such a friend to yourself and to others, to encourage clarity without force, to offer presence without agenda. As we let their story settle, we may notice something quiet but enduring, a sense that freedom is not distant, that wisdom is not foreign, that the path, though subtle, is already beneath our feet. The question is not whether awakening is possible. The question is whether we are willing to lay down what obscures it, moment by moment, and walk gently forward as they did, without needing to arrive. As the night deepens and the mind grows quiet, the figures of Sariputta and Mahamoggallana no longer stand before us as distant names carried across centuries. They fade gently into something closer, more intimate, like two steady flames whose warmth remains even after the fire is no longer seen. Their lives do not ask us to admire them. They ask us to pause, to notice how often we rush towards certainty and how rarely we rest in clarity, to see how easily we cling to what we know and how quietly freedom waits when we release our grip. Sariputta reminds us that wisdom is not cleverness, but careful seeing, that understanding matures not through argument, but through humility. Mahamoggallana reminds us that depth is not escape, but intimacy, that even the vast inner worlds of the mind are to be known, not possessed. Together, they offer a single, unspoken assurance. The path is walkable, not for the perfect, not for the fearless, but for the sincere. If there is suffering in your life, it does not disqualify you. If there is doubt in your heart, it does not bar the way. If you feel ordinary, uncertain, unfinished, this is exactly where the path begins. The Buddha's chief disciples did not leave the world behind. They learned to stand within it without being shaken. And in doing so, they left us something precious, not answers to memorize, but a way of being, to discover for ourselves. Let this story accompany you quietly. Let it surface in moments of confusion, or weariness, or quiet resolve. Let it remind you that wisdom can be gentle, that clarity can be patient, and that liberation does not announce itself. It reveals itself slowly, like dawn. If these reflections resonate, if this stillness feels familiar or nourishing, you are welcome to continue walking here. This channel exists not to persuade, but to sit beside you, to explore the Dharma with care, depth, and presence, one step at a time. May your path unfold with clarity. May your heart remain unburdened. And may you discover, as Sariputta and Mahamoggallana did, that freedom is never elsewhere. It is found in seeing clearly right where you stand.